And then we are going to have our Vice Chairman of Public Policy pick first, and that is going to determine the order. So, Mr. Chairman. This is Bill Palumba from Blazia Chevrolet.
And we have Congresswoman Hayes will start us off.
Okay, so we will be with you momentarily.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Bill Palumba, as Lynn said, from Blazia Chevrolet Cadillac, and I have the honor of serving as Vice Chairman of Public Policy for the Greater Waterbury. Via Zoom. On behalf of the Chamber's Board of Directors and our members, I sincerely want to thank incumbent Democratic Representative Jahana Hayes and Republican candidate David X. Sullivan for accepting our invitation to participate in this debate, particularly under these circumstances. We are looking forward to what I know will be a very interesting exchange of ideas and positions, current issues facing Connecticut's 5th District voters. Can you take a moment, please, just to acknowledge the corporate support that enabled the Chamber to present today's debate. Our federal sponsor is Ion Bank of Naugatuck, and representing Ion Bank is the Executive Vice President and Chief Commercial Banking Officer, Jane Kelly, and we'd like to have Jane say a few words. So Jane, if you will.
Jane, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We need to unmute you so that, or can you unmute yourself and begin again?
Thank you, Lynn. I apologize. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jane Kelly, Executive Vice President at Ion Bank. And on behalf of the bank, we are very proud to support the Waterbury Regional Chamber events, such as today's 5th District Congressional Debate. In these very difficult economic times, we look to the business community and our political leaders to partner and help lead residents and businesses in our towns and cities toward brighter futures. Ion Bank has seen firsthand the impact that the pandemic has had on companies, and through the partnership with the Small Business Administration, we have been able to assist almost 1,700 businesses, local businesses, with the Paycheck Protection Program loans totaling over $178 million. Founded in Naugatuck in 1870, we are celebrating our 150-year anniversary this year. We have grown while facing adverse times before, such as times of war, the Great Depression, the flood of 1955, and more recently, the Great Recession this century. We have witnessed the impact these events have had on individuals and businesses as they relate to Connecticut's economy. Through the many challenges we have faced, it was steady, strong, committed leadership that has seen us through. Like many companies in attendance, Ion Bank remains committed to the success of Connecticut and the greater Waterbury region. We are proud to sponsor today's debate and excited to hear where the candidates stand on most of the important issues of the day, that they will, and the impact that they will have on our businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. We'd also like to thank our congressional sponsor, Waterbury Hospital, and our state sponsors, Direct Line Media, Hubbard Hall Incorporated, Paolino Public Affairs Consulting, and of course, the Republican American newspaper. Public policy efforts such as this just would not be possible with the corporate support that we receive, and we're very thankful for that. So we are very excited to host today's debate, and which again will be focusing on issues particularly important to our chamber members and the region's business community. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's event, the managing editor of the Republican American and the Sunday Republican, and Karolyi. This fall marks Ann's 20th election season with the newspaper. She has directed coverage as the Litchfield County editor, as managing editor to the former executive editor, and now as managing editor in charge of the Republican American's news staff and daily operations for both its print publication and its website, rep-am.com. During her time as managing editor, the news staff has been honored with 5 Newspaper of the Year awards and 3 General Excellence Awards from the New England Newspaper and Press Association. A great testament to the paper. Anna, however, is quick to credit the accomplishments to the hardworking journalists that she has on staff, and they prove daily the importance of having a local newspaper. So also in an ancillary role, Ann serves as president of the Greater Watership Campership Fund, born out of the Republican American and now in its 51st year. Despite the pandemic, the fund, through the generosity of its donors, still managed to continue its long-standing mission of sending local underprivileged kids to camp this past summer. So it gives me great pleasure to extend a warm welcome to our moderator, Ann Karolyi. Ann?
Give me a moment for our virtual setup here. So I can be plugged in. The term of 2020, plugged in. Wow, that's better. Now I'm able to hear and see everything on this great debate. So everybody, welcome. Welcome this morning. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, out there watching us on CTN, on repam.com, and of course on Zoom. You know, I really have to say, it's time. I have to give us a shout out for all making the effort to be here this morning under what I'm sure are not ideal circumstances. We would much rather all be here in person, but hey, that's 2020, right? What a crazy year we are having. We are facing so many challenges. You know, I don't know of any one person who has not been affected by this pandemic. Maybe you're working from home. Maybe you are in need of a post-pandemic haircut. Maybe someone in your family or yourself or a friend has actually gotten the virus. Maybe you are facing unprecedented business challenges that you have never had to deal with before. And of course, this is where I have to insert my completely self-serving plug to remind you to support your local newspaper. Advertise, subscribe, click, keep us going, as we are really interested in helping the chamber, helping our communities, helping our voters become educated. Because what is so amazing about our country happens every fall with our ability to vote. And to be an educated voter is so important. So thank you to the chamber. And thank you to all of you for taking the time and making the effort to join us in this virtual debate. How about we get started? I'm going to now introduce the 2 candidates seeking the office of United States Representative for Connecticut's 5th Congressional District. Jahana Hayes is the incumbent, a Democrat seeking re-election to a 2nd term. A Waterbury native, she was a social studies teacher at John F. Kennedy High School in the Brass City when she was named the 2016 National Teacher of the Year. She also served as a talent and professional development supervisor for Waterbury Public Schools. In Congress, Representative Hayes sits on the House Committees of Agriculture and Education and Labor. Her areas of legislative focus are equitable access to quality education, affordable health care for everyone, food security, labor, agriculture, and the environment. She has a bachelor's degree in secondary education and teaching history from Southern Connecticut State University, a master's in curriculum and instruction from the University of St. Joseph, and a 6-year advanced degree in educational administration and supervision from the University of Bridgeport. Mrs. Hayes lives in Woolkit with her husband, Detective Milford Hayes, and they have 4 children. Thank you so much for joining us, Representative Hayes. David X. Sullivan is the Republican nominee. He has been a federal prosecutor for the past 30 years in the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Connecticut. In 2004, he completed a 16-month assignment to the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. at the Executive Office of United States Attorneys, serving as the National Money Laundering Asset Forfeiture Coordinator for the nation's 93 U.S. attorneys' offices. As an assistant United States attorney, Mr. Sullivan has extensive trial experience in civil and criminal cases. He also has defended the United States in civil cases. Mr. Sullivan is a graduate of Catholic University of America with a bachelor's degree in English literature. He received his law degree from Columbus School of Law at the Catholic University of America and a Master of Laws in Federal Taxation from Quinnipiac University School of Law, formerly the University of Bridgeport School of Law. He was born in Danbury and raised in New Fairfield. He and his wife, attorney Wendy Sullivan, have 5 children. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Sullivan. Now, let's get down to business. Here is the format for this afternoon's debate. As moderator, I get to ask the questions, which were prepared by chamber staff with input from chamber leaders, its public policy committee, and editors and reporters of the Republican American. The candidates have not seen these questions. You saw that earlier Lynn Ward placed both candidates' names in a bowl and drew them out to determine who would begin the debate. Based on that luck of the draw, Mrs. Hayes will have 2 minutes to make her opening statement. Mr. Sullivan will then have 2 minutes to make his opening statement. After the opening statements, we'll begin with our questions. Mr. Sullivan will have 60 seconds to answer our first question. Mrs. Hayes will then have 60 seconds to answer. And then Mr. Sullivan will have 30 seconds for rebuttal. We will reverse the order for the next question and so on. As moderator, I have the discretion to award additional time or pose follow-up questions. And if the candidates would like to request time, they can ask me. We hope to get as many questions as possible over the time we have. So many important issues out there for business leaders and workers and employees in the 5th District. Our timer, who you will be able to see on your screen, Mr. Dave Krzyzewski of the Waterbury Chamber, will hold up a sign for the candidates at the 30-second and 10-second marks. Very nice sign work there, Dave. Nice technique. Then he'll do a sign that indicates when time is up. Time is up. It seems that this election season, we need to rephrase this, means time is up. If a candidate continues to speak beyond the allotted time, I'll remind them to stop. And we ask the candidates to please respect the time limits, especially as we're trying to cover so many important issues this morning. At the close of the debate, Mr. Sullivan will have 60 seconds for a closing statement, followed by a 60-second closing statement by Mrs. Hayes. So now that we've mapped out the rules, how about we begin? Representative Hayes, please begin with your opening statement.
Good morning, and thank you to the Chamber for hosting this debate and for inviting me to join you to discuss the issues critical to the people in this district. I could have never anticipated my first term in Congress. There's been so many challenges, from the longest government shutdown to navigating a concurrent global pandemic and economic and social unrest that we are living through. But through it all, I have worked really hard to give voice to the people in this district. I took hundreds of actions to provide increased PPE for hospital workers and first responders, vital assistance to our local businesses and state government, and relief for those facing housing and food insecurity. The CARES Act drew on my legislation to provide Connecticut hospitals with desperately needed funding to deal with this crisis. So far, Connecticut healthcare providers have received over $1 billion in federal funds from the bills that we passed. I called for and supported the payroll protection loans and increased flexibility for businesses to be able to use those funds for other expenses outside of payroll. I have been a leading voice in my committee work. And on my committee, I've worked to make college more affordable, provide full funding for students with disability, create career and technical training programs, and speaking out on the safe reopening of schools. Over 50,000 Connecticut businesses have received loans of $150,000 or less through the legislation that we've passed. This has been critical to stabilizing our local economy. In the beginning of the pandemic, I worked so that economic injury disaster loans would be available to nonprofits and 501c3s and Bs. I helped to work on legislation to address the needs to reopen our schools. I've worked to lower the cost of healthcare and prescription drug prices and increase access to mental health services and reinvest in our national infrastructure. In the past 2 years, I've brought over $7 million back to my constituents through economic impact payments, Social Security benefits, tax returns, and more. I've held 9 town halls throughout the district and held casework on your corner in all 41 towns. All of this while being locked down in a pandemic for 1/3 of my term. There's so much more work that we need to do. I'm just getting started. As we work to rebuild our communities, we have to make sure that no one is left behind. I want to work to help support local businesses, but also support individuals to be self-sufficient and contributors in our community. That's what we're going to need. I'm running for re-election now because the citizens in this community just need a shot. The businesses in this community just need to be stabilized, and together we will all work towards a better future. This situation demands unprecedented responses and unprecedented resources. We cannot leave anyone behind as we work to rebuild. And that's what I'm about, bringing people together and working to rebuild. I look forward to the questions that you have today. I look forward to sharing the work that I've done and the work that I will continue to do, and hearing from everybody that supports local businesses and our Waterbury Chamber. So thank you again for having me, and I look forward to today's discussion.
Thank you, Representative Hayes. And now, Mr. Sullivan, please begin with your opening statement.
Thank you, Ann, and thank the Chamber for this opportunity to be with you today and talk about the issues that affect the 5th District, our state, and our country. I began this journey leaving the U.S. Attorney's Office on June 28th, 2019, and 3 hours later, I was at the Amber Room in Danbury and filed with the FEC the following Monday on July 1st. I told my wife it was a 16-month job interview. Well, we're down to 12 days. And at that time, I also said, it's a campaign against Jahana Hayes, but it's a war against socialism. And we have to bring Connecticut's economy back. We haven't seen that. We haven't seen that since the 2007-2008 recession. Right now, if we could go back before COVID to January of 2020, you'd see a nation that had 7 million new jobs, 1.2 new manufacturing jobs, lower personal taxes for the middle class, a lower corporate tax rate that brought back over $12 trillion of reinvested money into this country, the lowest unemployment rates for Black Americans, Asian Americans, and Latino Americans. And 72% of those new jobs were filled by women. So much was going on in our country, and people would say it's a robust economy, but not here in Connecticut. Our seniors are concerned about affordability, whether or not they can stay here after retirement. Our college and high school graduates suffer from finding high-paying jobs here in Connecticut, and that's been a problem. So I'm asking you for your support in this regard. We need a leader in Congress, not someone who votes with Nancy Pelosi 100% of the time, AOC 95% of the time, and with this administration just 4.4% of the time. So I welcome your questions today, and I look forward to speaking with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Okay, let's get into the questions. That's why we're all here today. You know, I mentioned that when we kicked off that I don't know of anybody who hasn't in some way been affected by this pandemic. And in fact, our first question is related to COVID-19. Our first question goes to Mr. Sullivan. Connecticut's response to COVID-19 has been noted nationally for its dampening of transmission. However, for business owners, and especially owners of small businesses, the consequences of long shutdowns and an inability to return to work have proven challenging and in some cases catastrophic. While states control their responses to and mandates for the virus, as we all know from Governor Lamont's daily updates, is there a role for Congress in reopening our economy during the pandemic? And if so, what is that role? Mr. Sullivan, you have 60 seconds.
Well, thank you. I think it's very important to note that right now Congress is in a stalemate. Speaker Pelosi has a $2.2 trillion stimulus plan. The administration's at $1.8 trillion. We need to get together to get this going. Connecticut has affordability issues. Our small businesses were struggling even before COVID. So we need to make sure that we can reopen safely and quickly, much like our schools. And I applaud Governor Lamont for doing that. But we need to use practical and safe precautions along the way. We have to make Connecticut competitive again. And to do that, we've lost prior to COVID, Hubble in Bethel and Newtown, and McKesson Pharmaceutical in Farmington. So we have a lot of work to do as we come out of COVID, and that work pre-existed COVID. And I think the administration was on the right track.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Mrs. Hayes.
Thank you. I think that the federal government can assist during this pandemic by, first of all, providing funds for testing and contact tracing. The economy will not do well until people are healthy again. No matter what we do, unless we get a handle on this virus, we'll have these recurring problems. I also think that Congress can support state and local municipalities so that they stay afloat and we don't have to lay off essential workers and people are able to continue to go to their jobs. Increase PPP funding for businesses that can be transferred from loans into grants so that local businesses can not only survive, but thrive in a post-pandemic world. I think it's also important to note that the president has recently said that he wants more than $2.2 trillion because he recognizes what is necessary to get us out of this impending recession and this health and economic crisis. So I will do whatever I can in Congress to continue to support local businesses, but first and foremost, to make people safe and healthy.
Thank you, Mrs. Hayes. Mr. Sullivan, you can have another 30 seconds if you'd like.
Well, I'm very encouraged by the response. I think Congress has to get back to work, and certainly the state of Connecticut has to get back to work. The Paycheck Protection Program has lapsed at least once during COVID, and that's unacceptable. Congress gets paid, government officials and employees get paid. We've got to make sure that all our employees and our small businesses are also paid.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to our next question. This one goes first to Representative Hayes. What do you believe is the most important issue facing business and industry in the 5th Congressional District, and what do you believe should be done about it?
I think right now, top of mind for everyone is opening to full capacity during a pandemic, keeping their employers connected to their employment, making sure that they have customers who are available for their services. Again, the economy is dependent upon the way we respond to this health crisis. There are so many workers who have been laid off, their hours have been cut. And being a federal employee for 30 years, Mr. Sullivan knows that there are so many people dependent upon taxpayer dollars for their paychecks. We have to continue to work towards bringing a healthcare response so that our economy can thrive and businesses can open. What we've done is so unpredictable. Many businesses have opened only to have to close after several days or several weeks because there was an outbreak. So we have to get the pandemic under control so that businesses can have consistency in their reopening efforts.
Mr. Hayes, can I just jump in with a quick question about that response? You're saying we need to get the healthcare response under control. Do you think that a tested vaccine put in use is required before that can happen? Or do you think we can take steps before that vaccine is widely available?
I absolutely think we can take steps before the vaccine is widely available. The data has shown us that wearing masks, social distancing, and practicing CDC guidance, if everyone practiced that with fidelity until we got a vaccine, I think that we could have a better handle on what is happening. It's unfortunate that that issue has been politicized.
Mr. Sullivan.
Yes, talking to people, small business owners across the 41 towns for the last 16 months, so many have been frustrated with their inability to open at all. Watching the larger stores like Costco and Lowe's and Target open and smaller businesses providing really the same type of goods and services, there were more restrictions on them than some of the larger corporations. So I think the state's done a very good job with COVID. And I think that locally people know and want to be responsible about protecting themselves and those that patronize their businesses. So we need to make sure that we reopen as quickly and as safely as possible, and that we keep their tax burden on the federal level, to the minimum right now. And I know that there's been discussions about suspending payroll taxes for a bit to help these small business owners get back on their feet. And I would support that for a period of time.
I'm going to ask the same question of you, Mr. Sullivan, that I asked of Mrs. Hayes before she gets her 30 seconds. Do you believe a vaccine widely in use is required before we start to reopen businesses more?
Well, it's very interesting when you say required. I think a vaccine should be available to all, but I think what's going to happen, I'm not sure you can legislate requiring someone to take a vaccine. I think the question becomes one for the courts under case and controversy, where you have someone's personal liberties being balanced or offset by the public interest health issues. And so I don't know if you can really compel them without a fight constitutionally, but I would certainly encourage people that if a vaccine's available, that they should consider strongly being vaccinated.
And do you think we can take steps to reopen before that vaccine is available?
Absolutely. I think we should be taking steps right now. I don't think we can afford to stay closed, quite frankly. Connecticut's economy was fragile before COVID. It's so important, so critical that we get moving again.
Mrs. Hayes, you still have another 30 seconds on this topic if you'd like.
Thank you. I think I would just like to include that I've heard from many local business owners that they're frustrated that businesses right next to them are not following all the rules. And for the people who are following all of the guidances and the reopening plans and doing everything that they're supposed to do, they feel like that their businesses are suffering as a result of that. I think everyone needs to be on the same page, follow the same set of guidelines and recommendations so that our entire community can reopen and do that safely.
I would like to note that when I arrived at the chamber this morning, I signed in, I provided contact tracing, and we have kept our masks on until we all were in very socially distant places. So kudos to the chamber who are following the rules. Let's go on to question 3, which goes to Mr. Sullivan. Manufacturing is a key industry sector in the 5th District and in Connecticut overall. Manufacturers, both large and small, are still seeking to fill thousands of jobs across the state. What should the federal government do to help develop the skilled workforce desperately needed by manufacturers in Connecticut? And has the pandemic altered the ability to address this issue? Mr. Sullivan.
Yes, thank you. And I think the pandemic has affected really all facets of our life. With respect to manufacturing, I have talked to people in the Waterbury area involved in manufacturing, and I've seen firsthand the apprenticeship programs that some people put in place for Caner Tech and Abbott Tech and Danbury and Platt Tech and other places. And I think that's a very helpful process for manufacturers to bring people in as they're still in school. and give them real work experience. And so many instances, people are hired permanently. And I've seen and talked to people who've been the beneficiaries of those programs. So I think that we need more manufacturing, not just in this state, but in this country, especially when we're talking about generic prescription drugs coming from China. And I want to work hard to bring that back, not just to the country, but to Connecticut.
Thank you. Mrs. Hayes.
Thank you. I've been a leading voice on this very topic on my committee. Although I'm an educator, I don't agree that college is the only pathway to success. I've championed the National Apprenticeship Program, and that should be coming to the floor of Congress. I hope to open up more funding for community colleges and for us to be able to connect with local businesses so that our curriculum aligns with the local workforce. I think even at the high school level, we need to see what jobs are available in our communities and prepare young people for those jobs. I've heard from so many manufacturers and businesses that they have jobs that they cannot fill. I think we have to make it more readily available and in high school, guide young people into the jobs that exist and move them through those pathways. I think there's also an opportunity for many of our technical training schools to really thrive, and we need to do a lot better job to promote those to young people the same way we do colleges.
Mr. Sullivan, 30 seconds.
Well, yes, I think that's right. And as well as our technical schools, our magnet schools, these are very important programs. College isn't for everyone these days. I think we're finding that out, especially with the high cost of college and the opportunities here in Connecticut for college graduates to find those meaningful, well-paying jobs. So we have to do more to attract and bring our students home. But we need to really revive Connecticut's economy and bring businesses back, not just create businesses, but we have to be able to attract businesses back to Connecticut. And oh, well, my time is up.
Actually, I'm gonna throw in a quick extra little question on this question. And let's do this one same format, 60, 60, 30. This is no offense to our college graduates of the world who I know are very challenged right now trying to job hunt as they graduate in the course of a pandemic. But I'm also curious about people who have lost jobs or whose positions have been eliminated because of the COVID pandemic. Is there a way the federal government can help these workers, maybe middle-aged workers, workers of all ages who have lost positions, who might need a plan B and might need new training? Is there a federal answer to that to be able to help those people? How about we start with Mr. Sullivan?
Well, I think one thing would be lifelong learning that, so many people graduate at a young age from college or high school and their formal education ends. And I know there are programs after a certain age in places like Western Connecticut State, you can go back for free and get a continuing education. And I think it's very important that we all continue to learn and adapt as our society changes. We're going to be going, as you know, with combustible engines are going to be a thing of the past in the near future. Electric seems to be the way we're going, and we need more green jobs, and we need to develop and nurture future manufacturing and future industry and in a clean world and looking in that direction.
Thank you. Mrs. Hayes, is there an answer for workers who suddenly find themselves needing a plan B?
Yes, absolutely. And the answer would be the same. The apprenticeship program I spoke about would also extend to people who are seeking job retraining, registered apprenticeships, or even people whose jobs have been eliminated to prepare people for the new jobs. I think with COVID, we've seen so much in the digital space, and I'm sure that there's going to be a place for many people who find themselves unemployed to find new employment. So again, investing in our community colleges, investing in job training programs, even incentivizing employers to help retrain their existing employees for the new jobs that exist instead of laying them off. Those are all things that need to be considered and are included in the National Apprenticeship Program that I am a leader on.
Thank you. Let's move on to our next question. This one goes to Mrs. Hayes. U.S. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has called for a 5-year liability shield for businesses related to employees contracted COVID-19 at work. Should a business owner be held liable if an employee contracts COVID-19 while on the job? Mrs. Hayes.
I don't think a business owner should be held completely liable, but what Mitch McConnell, this majority leader, is calling for is blanket immunity from any type of liability. I think that provisions have to be put in place to keep employees safe, to allow employees to stay out of work so that they do not spread spread COVID, and to make sure that OSHA requirements are followed. I think we all have a responsibility here, both the business owners and the employees. So I do not agree with McConnell's plan of this blanket immunity, but I do not think that business owners should be held completely liable if an employee contracts COVID on the job.
Mr. Sullivan.
Well, you know, the lawyer in me comes out on this. Well, how does one know that someone contracted COVID on the job? I think that OSHA requirements should always be followed. But the reality is, I tend to agree with this approach about the 5-year plan because so many cases civilly that are filed are never truly litigated. They're looked at for the nuisance value and settled. So people always are filing suits, and many are frivolous. But again, it costs more to even litigate frivolous suits than those with merit. And I think it'd be very hard to prove under the standards that you did in fact contract COVID. I think once you have COVID, I think, yes, I agree with Ms. Hayes that you should be out of the workplace and isolating, and we should take all the necessary steps. But the litigation would be so costly and expensive, and I doubt very much much of it would go to any type of resolution in a courtroom.
I can't resist a lawyer joke. Thank you for keeping to your time. Mrs. Hayes, you have 30 seconds if you'd like it.
Well, as someone who myself and my husband both contracted COVID through workplace exposure, I have to stick to my original answer. I think there's a responsibility of both the employee and the employer, and things have to be done to put in place to make sure that employees are safe. We are in a litigious nation. People have the right to file a suit. It doesn't mean that all of those suits will come to fruition, but in this pandemic, employees also have to be protected and felt that their workplace is a safe environment.
I thank you very much, Mrs. Hayes. I wasn't going to mention it up because your health and your husband's health is your personal business, but you mentioned it. So I think we can all say that regardless of party or where we're going to vote on election day, we're very glad to see you up and campaigning, and hope you can be an inspiration for people who get COVID and successfully conquer it. So we're very glad you're with us here today. Let's move on to question 5. That goes to Mr. Sullivan first. However, our current Supreme Court drama plays out, and if I recall correctly, we have some activity going on today in Washington on this matter. However, our current Supreme Court drama plays out, the Affordable Care Act, popularly known as Obamacare, is due for consideration before the nation's highest court. What is your impression of what the ACA has done for employers who provide the majority of health insurance in this country? And what is your position on what should happen with our health insurance industry? Mr. Sullivan.
Well, thank you. The ACA was 2,572 pages long. And as Nancy Pelosi said, you have to pass it before you can understand it. Premiums have gone up approximately 30%. Fortunately, the mandate was removed. And I think it says a lot when during the Democrat presidential debates earlier last year, so many were critical of the ACA. I think we can all agree that the ACA needs to be fixed or replaced. I don't see the Supreme Court striking down that 2,572-page law. The presumption, especially among the purist, is that Congress should be able to do what they want to do. And if you're going to do anything through the doctrine of severability, you may remove clauses of the ACA that are unconstitutional, but I don't see it being overturned by the court. And I think we need to make it more affordable in the future, but I don't have enough time to discuss that now. So I will leave it at that.
Mrs. Hayes.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the full question?
Certainly. However, our current Supreme Court drama plays out, the Affordable Care Act, popularly known as Obamacare, is due for consideration before the nation's highest court. What is your impression of what the ACA has done for employers who provide the majority of health insurance in this country? And what is your position on what should happen with our health insurance industry?
Thank you. Well, the Affordable Care Act was meant to provide insurance to more people, not less. And although it has had problems, we've had almost a decade to work to get it right. And this has not happened. I think we have to make sure that we do everything we can to make insurance affordable and accessible for people in this country. As we've seen so many people disconnected from their jobs, we've seen people left without insurance. I don't know how in the middle of a global health pandemic that we can have any other discussion that doesn't include making sure that people remain healthy and that they have preventative care and are connected to healthcare. I'm somebody who supports a Medicare for all system, but I recognize that I'm not a purist, that is not going to happen and it will not happen immediately. But this administration hasn't given any alternative plans. So what we have to do is make sure we lower the cost of healthcare, provide more access to people, lower the cost of prescription drugs, and do whatever we can to chip away incrementally at all of the things we need to do to make sure more people are insured.
Mr. Sullivan? Would you like your 30 seconds?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Yes, I would. I believe Ms. Hayes sponsors a Medicare for All program that would take private healthcare away from 180 million people in this country and would cost us over 10 years about $32 trillion. There are 25,000 jobs in the district and in the state of Connecticut through insurance and healthcare professionals whose jobs would be at risk. Too many people have, private healthcare that they contracted for and should be able to keep it. We need a private and public option, but not Medicare for all.
Mrs. Hayes, since he raised the question, would you like to specifically speak to that point? Would the plan you're endorsing force anyone to lose their private health insurance?
Absolutely. I also support for people to have a public option. There are so many people like myself, so many people who negotiated over the years, took decreases in wages in order to ensure that they have health care. Those people should be able to keep that. However, we cannot ignore the fact that millions of people in this country are left without health care and have chronic health conditions that end up costing us more in the long run. This pandemic has shown us that we have to make sure that people are healthy because our entire community is vulnerable. If we have pockets of vulnerable health people who are medically fragile who live amongst us.
Thank you. Let's move on to our next question. This one goes to Mrs. Hayes.
Wait, was I muted?
Many businesses and industries in Connecticut rely on immigrants who are here on H-1B, H-2A, and H-2B work visas. These can be foreign workers who pick apples or do farming work, or those who fill technical jobs when companies are unable to find US workers with the necessary skills. The current administration has limited these visas. Do you support this? Why or why not?
I do not support limiting those visas. I've heard from so many people in this district, especially in our agriculture sector, who say it's too unpredictable. They've had the same families who come and work for years at a time or over many, many years and are not looking for American citizenship. These employers would like to be able to plan ahead for the next season or hire workers. Currently, there's only 3 ways to come to this country as an immigrant: through humanitarian efforts, through family reunification, or through employment, and it's very highly specialized jobs. I think we need to expand that so our employers can plan ahead for the next season or hire people for very specific jobs. We saw even in this COVID pandemic that some doctors and medical professionals who were highly specialized and skilled were at risk of being deported because their visas had expired at a time when we needed them most. I do not support the idea of limiting those, and we really need to look at how so many people who come to this country through those type of plans contribute to our economy, pay taxes, and help in our communities.
Mr. Sullivan.
Yes, over 1 million people a year come into this country through our legal immigration program. That's more than any other country in the world. With respect to those with visas who are picking apples or working on dairy farms in the state of Connecticut in this district, why not Americans? Why not American citizens right now who are in need of jobs and employment? We have high cost right now of our unemployment. And, perhaps there are other alternatives that people in the dairy industries and these industries should be considering, since so many people are out of work and they're Americans.
Please, 30 30 more seconds.
I don't think this is an either American or immigrant question. I've spoken to many of these farmers and many of these people and have been told that they cannot fill these jobs. And it's not just farmers. We have some highly skilled technical workers. Again, I think we need to expand our immigration process. When we talk about the millions of people who came here legally, our system has changed and it has not evolved with our 21st century immigration needs. We need to, for so many people who are told to get in line, there is no line for them. We need to change the way we view immigration in this country because not everyone can come to Ellis Island and just present themselves and get in the process for being an American citizen. There is no line for them.
Next question goes to Mr. Sullivan. Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden has proposed treating capital gains as regular income and taxing it that way. This is part of his promised repeal, if elected, of the 2017 tax reform, which he says cut taxes for the wealthiest individuals but hurt the middle class. He has also proposed raising corporate taxes. How would these proposals help or hurt the 5th District?
Well, I disagree with Joe Biden's tax plan 100%. If you raise the corporate tax again, the $12 trillion that was reinvested in this country goes right out the door. Those manufacturing jobs that came back that President Obama said would never come back, those 1.2 million, they're out the door. If you want to tax capital gains the same way you tax regular income, people and their 401ks will suffer. Individuals who work their entire lives will not be able to amass any personal wealth to just get by in their older and declining years. So I oppose all of that. The fact that he's saying that he's not raising tax on the middle class, that's a fallacy. By repealing the Trump tax cuts, the rates on the middle class will go up by operation of law. So no, there will be no one introducing legislation to raise taxes. It will just happen. So it's very problematic, and $4 trillion of additional taxes coming out of COVID will stifle this economy nationally for a decade or more. And in Connecticut, it will be economic Armageddon.
Mrs. Hayes.
I think that while the claims are true that the bill benefits everyone, our lowest income earners will see those benefits fade out by the year 2027, while corporations will see those benefits stay permanently. I think we have to, especially now, if we can't look at our economy and say we need to have an economy that works for everyone, not just CEOs and the largest corporations. 95 of the top Fortune 500 corporations pay no federal taxes, while many Americans, everyday hardworking Americans, are expected to do that. I think everyone has to pay their share. When the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was passed, the CBO estimated that it would increase our national debt by $1 trillion. We are at a point where everyone in our community has to do their part. So I support the plan that Vice President Biden has put forward, because it is a plan that recognizes not only the top earners in this country, but everyone, and so many of our essential workers who are right now holding up our economy.
Mr. Sullivan, 30 more seconds.
Yes, the tax cuts that the president introduced and were passed showed, and I always cite the Wall Street Journal, December 23rd of last year, where they even acknowledged that the bottom 10% of our wage earners benefited the most from the tax cuts. The Federal Reserve did a report that they do every 3 years that showed that Black wealth, not necessarily in Connecticut, went up 35%. Latino wealth went up 65% in 2019, and white wealth went up just 3%. So that's a recent Federal Reserve report that's come out.
All right, let's keep moving along before they drag me away from the podium with a big cane. We want to get in as many questions as we can. This one goes to Mrs. Hayes. According to the U.S. Energy Administration, Connecticut residents pay the highest electric rates among the 48 continental states. That's a list we can enjoy. There are many reasons for this, including a growing reliance on natural gas, lack of natural resources, deregulation, and the high cost of doing business in the state for utilities. Can anything be done at the federal level to help reduce the cost of power in Connecticut? And if so, what? Mrs. Hayes.
I think that in the state of Connecticut, we have been hit incredibly hard over the last couple of weeks, where people are noticing, actually last couple of months, how their energy rates are going up. In Congress, we've worked with neighboring states to see some of the other things that they're doing and to make sure that we provide alternative energy sources and make sure that no one company has a monopoly. I think that's what we're seeing right now in the state. The Attorney General is working really hard to bring down the costs here at the state level, and the cost of doing business in our state is impacted by our state and local taxes, which is not a federal issue. But I think at the federal level, we can continue to make sure that businesses are operating in a fair way in our state, that we provide more access to different and reliable means of energy, so that we're not over reliant on companies like Eversource. I think this is a really great opportunity for us to bring energy efficient and green jobs here and really diversify the way we have energy in this state.
Mr. Sullivan.
Well, I agree. I think it's really more of a state issue with PURA and what the state negotiates with respect to our utility costs, which are obviously extremely high. I think it's very important that within the last 3 years, if you've noticed, our gasoline prices have gone down a great deal. We've become energy independent in that regard, and we've actually been exporting fossil fuels. But again, we have to look to the future, and we want a green planet, and we want green emissions. So I do agree that we need to bring these types of jobs in. I've had Zoom meetings with corporations outside of Connecticut trying to talk to them about electric vehicles, not just cars, and their vision for the future, as well as clean water and water filtration. There are 16,000 of these around the country, and half of them are failing. And so we've got a lot of work to do.
Mrs. Hayes, you want your next 30 seconds?
I'll just say that I'm really excited to hear that Mr. Sullivan agrees with me on these issues, because it has been a top priority for me in Congress, and this is exactly the type of thing that I've been working on.
Okay, let's move on. Next question goes to Mr. Sullivan. The pandemic and related economic shutdown have created record unemployment levels, both in Connecticut and nationally. Many have called upon the federal government to cover the funding of unemployment compensation payments to prevent a further drag on the economy. This is particularly important in Connecticut, which has trailed the nation in recovering jobs lost during the Great Recession. Do you support federal relief of the unemployment compensation system? Why or why not? Mr. Sullivan.
I support reopening the economy before these small businesses and other entities are unable to reopen. I think that when you put people back to work, you have to worry less about the government providing for the unemployment compensation. I think that if people are back to work and we are able to pass a stimulus bill in the interim, I think that's the way you kickstart an economy. And unfortunately, Connecticut has never recovered from the 2007-2008 recession. We're the only state in the Northeast that still has negative GDP. So the answer is not more money from the government. The answer is getting people back to work. And that's why I also support, at least for a period of time, suspending payroll tax so that employers can get their people back in and start to restructure and get back to the business of whatever it is they do.
I think that to this question, in a different time, I would have probably had a different answer, but I do support for the federal government supporting states through unemployment compensation. Many people, through no fault of their own, many businesses through no fault of their own, are closed because of COVID. And just like we have made a concerted effort to support businesses, we have to do the same to support individuals. Many people would like to go back to work, but because of family or their health, they cannot. So to turn our backs on those people right now during a global pandemic is not the way we rebuild our economy. I see this as a temporary solution for people whose jobs become available and they're offered to come back to work and they should be required to go back to work. But just like we've supported businesses and nonprofits and every other segment of the economy, I think that this increased scrutiny on individuals who, trust me, nobody wants to be reliant on the federal government. If people can go back to work, I believe that the people in this community will go back to work. But until we get healthy and we can make sure that's done safely, I think we need to continue to support individuals.
Mr. Sullivan, you have 30 more seconds.
Well, I think that's why we have the Paycheck Protection Program for one. I think that we have to make sure that we have available personal protection equipment, PPE available. I think that we give people and give business owners and employees those options to make the decision. Do we reopen? Do I go back to work? It's a local decision. And I think everyone has their own best interests in heart when it comes to their personal safety and the safety of their loved ones and family members.
Thank you. Well, wow, time is flying here. Time flies when you're contemplating the future of the nation. Let's squeeze in a couple more questions at least. This one will go to Mrs. Hayes. About 44 million US residents carry a combined $1.6 trillion in student loan debt, according to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. That debt has a direct influence on the lives of young working professionals and therefore on their employers. Should the federal government take a role in reducing the amount of student debt? And if so, what should be done?
I don't know if I should recuse myself from this question, but yes, I believe the federal government should take a role because the federal government decided to make a profit off of student loan debt. And now so many of our people, young people, even adults who graduate, they have a heavy burden of going into the workforce already in debt. I think that we passed the College Affordability Act to lower the cost of college. I think that community colleges should be debt-free and that people who are able to should be able to pay their way through college, but also graduate without this tremendous burden of debt. It affects people's ability to buy a home. It affects their credit score. It affects the jobs they choose in the workplace. Many people, myself included, had to work multiple jobs after college just to be able to afford to pay the rent. And that is a deterrent for people, a deterrent to success for people who would like to go to college or graduate with a degree that they cannot use. So yes, I believe that the federal government should intervene to lower the cost of college, to make it more affordable, and to make sure that people have a graduated repayment schedule for their debt.
Mr. Sullivan.
Well, I've been teaching at the Yale Law School since 1996 and Western Connecticut State University for about 11 years and the University of New Haven in graduate national security programs for probably about 10 years. And I always tell my students, it's nice to get an education, but it's nice to get an education and be employed. Now, if you're going to go into a school or an institution, WestCon is a state school, University of New Haven's a private school, and Yale, well, that's just in another world. But the reality is, what about the private institutions that take a 17-year-old or 18-year-old coming out of high school who's willing to mortgage their soul to go to one of these private institutions? I think some of it has to fall back on some of these institutions with their huge endowments to do something. Free education would be nice, but unfortunately, somebody always has to pay for it. And I've seen Elizabeth Warren approached when she was still a presidential candidate by a fellow who just paid off his daughter's student loans and said, what do I get? And she said, well, you get nothing. So you're going to reward those that aren't going to be able to pay it back. And others who did, there's no incentive for them to do that in the future. And it's very unfortunate.
Mrs. Hayes, do you want your 30 seconds?
Yes, I think that what's unfortunate is that we have so many people who are the first in their family to go to college who do not have the financial literacy to know how to negotiate a deal, if you will, with the colleges. I think that there has to be some responsibility for the cost of it. This idea that people should know, or if your parents can't afford it, then you shouldn't go to college. Closes the door to so many people in our economy and really limits the number of contributors we can have in our communities.
Thank you. All right, let's keep going. This one to Mr. Sullivan. Connecticut was described 30 years ago as an economic cul-de-sac because of our gridlocked transportation system. Things have improved only slightly since then. What would you support to improve the highways and rail system in the state?
As someone who for 30 years has driven from New Fairfield to federal courts in Hartford, Bridgeport, and New Haven every day on Interstate 84 and 95, for once. I'd like to work with this president and appeal to his vanity and say, let's make this a super highway. Let's alleviate the pressure on 95. And so many people who live on the shore love this idea. I don't think John Larson should have a dig on Interstate 84 up in Hartford. I think the Mixmaster needs to be buried. I think we definitely need a big project here, and I'm looking forward to working with this administration immediately to get something like that done. I have lived these highways for far too long.
Mrs. Hayes.
Yes, I absolutely agree that we need to address our infrastructure needs. When I came into this Congress, it looked like that might be a place where there could be some collaboration because members on both sides of the aisle talked about how important it was. Recently in Congress, we passed the Moving Forward Act and a national infrastructure bill, but it was expanded not just to include roads, bridges, highways. I mean, we've gotten federal grants to look at our train station and our transportation hubs to make sure that we're connected to other states. But I also think it needs to be expanded to include broadband connectivity and internet. We've seen so much of our economy is not only dependent on people's ability to get to work, but now we have this digital infrastructure that really needs to be built up in the state of Connecticut so that businesses can modernize and look forward and move into the future. So infrastructure is a top priority. I voted on my committee and on the floor for a school infrastructure bill. We need to look at every segment of our country and really address our crumbling infrastructure needs in a way that is meaningful and impactful and a job creator.
Mr. Sullivan, you want your 30 seconds?
I do. Thank you, Ann. Yes, I will tell you, you talk about that 30-year stretch. You know, we've had Democrat presidents, we've had Republican presidents, we've been represented by Democrats in the House and Senate for over a decade. I just want to see something come to Connecticut, an infrastructure package and a real a program to, yes, get people back to work, but at the same time, make sure that we actually address our needs here in this state, not somewhere else in the country.
Thank you. Next question goes to Mrs. Hayes. Waterbury and Naugatuck have launched a partnership to drive economic development. Its organizers say that the proposed inland port of Naugatuck could have a significant economic impact on Waterbury, the Naugatuck Valley, and in fact, the entire 5th District. Do you support funding for this project? Why or why not? Mrs. Hayes.
Yes, I would support funding for this project. Every decision that I make in Congress is based on how will this benefit my district? How will this benefit my state? How will this benefit this country? And I think the city of Waterbury has done a tremendous job with coming up with creative ways to attract new businesses, innovative businesses, different kinds of businesses. I was tremendously impressed when I saw that we were harvesting fish in what used to be a warehouse. I've seen so many places in this community where brownfields are being converted, and we're looking for creative ways to revive our economy. So the plan that you just described or the development there is something that would create a new stream of revenue for our community. It would connect Waterbury and Naugatuck and really revive what might have been a waterway or a segment of our economy that was not thriving. So I support any programs that in consultation with local businesses and local leaders where they're explaining to me how this would be helpful and how I could be most helpful in Congress to bring back the necessary funds to make those things happen.
Thank you. Mr. Sullivan.
You know, Naugatuck used to be in the 5th Congressional District when we had 6 districts. It's been part of Rosa DeLaura's district, and she's been in Congress for at least 30 years, I believe. Naugatuck and New Haven both. And I think, yes, anything that helps. I mean, you can't look at the 5th District and its cities and towns in a vacuum. What helps Connecticut will help the 5th Congressional District. But we have some people who represent us in Washington right now who have great seniority. And this plan's been around for a while and nothing's happened. I think under this administration coming out of post-COVID, I think what we've seen over the last 3 years is real economic growth and prosperity. And I think that if we go back and resume that plan and we can get Connecticut to be a part of it, I think this plan with Naugatuck and New Haven and this internal port can become a reality. So I think that would be great. We just need to have people there that can get this job done. And the people that have been there just haven't produced. So I think it's time for a change.
Mrs. Hayes, anything you'd like to say in 30 seconds?
I just would say that we're hearing a lot about different leaders from different districts or different parts of the country. I represent Connecticut's 5th Congressional District, and I'm listening to leaders and hearing what they're asking for and how I could be most beneficial to help them get the resources that they need to bring our economy back, to create new programs. I also think that change is good and that we need fresh faces and fresh voices. And I think that that's the perspective I bring. You know, there aren't many teachers in Congress, but there's a whole lot of lawyers and a whole lot of politicians. So I think that my perspective is incredibly unique, especially at this time.
Got a battle of the professions here. So we started out talking about the pandemic this morning. And so let's squeeze in a couple more questions that speak to our times. This one will start with Mr. Sullivan. As noted earlier and all year long, the current administration has left it to each individual state to develop its own response to COVID-19. Some states have done better than others in controlling the spread of the virus. Do you believe a more coordinated national response would have produced better results, especially for businesses and the concerns that businesses have during this pandemic? Why or why not?
Well, I think that with respect to a more coordinated effort, there's a reason why the CDC offers and has been offering guideline, advice to every state individually, because clearly there are urban areas and there are rural areas, and one size doesn't fit all. I think if there was a coordinated effort, it would mean make sure that we had the PPE available to all states depending upon their need. So much of the ventilators went to New York. They wanted them, they needed them, and they were concerned they wouldn't have enough, and they ended up having far more than they needed. So I think that anything we can do that coordinates making sure that we all have the opportunity to look at locally, each state individually with PPE would be a good thing. But to suggest a national shutdown, which is what you sometimes hear about, a coordinated effort, that would not have worked. It would have killed the economy, and one size does not fit all.
Mrs. Hayes?
I absolutely think that a national coordinated strategy would have been helpful from the very beginning and all the way through. In March, we voted for the Defense Production Act. Had that been fully employed to make sure that we could deploy what states need and shift our manufacturing and our economy to create and produce things like PPE and different things that we need, I truly believe that we'd be in a better position. Right now, a national strategy could include testing and contact tracing. Yes, a lot of those things can be decided on the local level, but as we've seen, our state and local governments need help from the federal government. Also, even long-term looking out, in July, I brought up that we need to start discussing childcare and thinking about what that looks like in order for our economy to reopen if schools don't open. Even things like that could have been part of a national strategy to make sure that we are addressing the needs of people in our community to not only stay safe and healthy, but to get our economy back up and running.
Mr. Sullivan, any last 30 seconds there?
Yes, we learned a painful lesson through this pandemic, and that is that China was principally involved in manufacturing most of our PPE. And they withheld much of it. And even American companies that were there and based there couldn't get masks and things back. And we also learned that they were producing the hard way most of our generic prescription drugs. We've learned this lesson, and what we've got to do is make sure that this kind of manufacturing comes back to this country for our economy and for national security. So with that, I think that we can do great things.
Thank you. All right, we're gonna squeeze in one more. I kicked off this morning by saying that I don't know of anybody who hasn't been affected by the pandemic. I'm pretty sure that I don't know anybody who doesn't recognize that we are in apparently increasingly divided and polarized times. I know I see that every day as the editor of the Republican American. I hear it from readers on both sides of the political aisle. I sometimes feel like I'm going to work in the front lines of a civil war with some of the calls that I get and concerns that I get from our readers about the state of the country. And in this increasingly polarized era, one in which supporters often view compromise as a failure. For some reason, if you compromise or acknowledge the other side, that's seen as a failure. If you are elected or re-elected, would you be willing to work across the aisle and to consider compromise on whatever the issue before you? Mr. Sullivan, let's start with you.
Well, Ann, I've worked for the federal government for 30 years. I started under the first Bush administration, and then did 8 years under the Clinton administration, and 8 years under Bush 43's administration, 8 years of working under President Obama, and then finally with President Trump. So I've seen a lot of different administrations come and go, and I respect the office of the president. I respect the future and the interests of the country first. I saw Bill Palumbo was on earlier today. In 1984, I worked for John Rowland. I was 23 years old, and Guy Vanderjack, the chairman of the National Republican Congressional Committee, came up and spoke. Now, when he passed away after in Congress, Charlie Rangel from Harlem spoke, and so did Vice President Dick Cheney. He was a partisan. He was a Reagan Republican, and so am I. I believe in working with everyone. I think it's in the best interest of our country. That's the way I was brought up, and that's what I'll do in Congress.
Mrs. Hayes?
Well, I've never saw myself first as a Democrat, and I would never identify as that. I'm an educator, and like I've always said, when kids came into your classroom, every single one of them was your student. Yes, I would work across the aisle. I don't care who gets credit for it. I know what the people in this district need and what is necessary to help make sure that we're not leaving anybody behind, and that people just have a fair shot, that we're leveling the playing field and giving everybody access to opportunity. Mr. Sullivan likes to talk about 95% of the time I voted with Nancy Pelosi. I would encourage everyone on this call to look at those votes. And if there's a vote that you think that I shouldn't have taken, I welcome the conversation. But I voted for things like lowering the cost of prescription drugs, for reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act, the 9/11 Victims Compensation Act, for Climate Action Now, for the Voting Rights Act. Some really good bills that I've heard many people in this district, even local business owners, talk about them needing. So I am here to make sure that whatever we can do to improve the lives of people in this district, that I am doing. And it doesn't matter who the president is. It doesn't matter who's in the Senate. I think every bill should have a hearing, and you vote yes or no and follow the process.
Mr. Sullivan, 30 seconds.
Well, since Ms. Hayes brought it up, she actually votes with Nancy Pelosi 100% of the time, and that was after 2 years ago she had pledged not to support her as Speaker of the House. She votes with AOC 95% of the time, and the Lugar Institute rates her as number 417 out of 435 Congresspeople as being the most partisan. She's also rated the most partisan of the 5 Democrat congressmen serving from Connecticut at this time. So it is what it is. The numbers don't lie.
Mrs. Hayes, would you like to speak to your record since Mr. Sullivan has brought that up?
Absolutely. I'm extremely proud of my record. The Lugar Institute talks about bills sponsored and co-sponsored over the lifetime of a member of Congress. This is my first term in Congress. And again, I am so incredibly proud of the votes that I've taken. Since Nancy Pelosi seems to be a recurring theme, when I got to the House, the first vote I was asked to take was for Speaker of the House. 2 people were running, Nancy Pelosi and Kevin McCarthy. We were in the middle of the longest government shutdown ever, and I did not go to Congress to play games. I wasn't going to write in a name. You deal with the situation that you're in. You take a vote on the climate that you're in based on the information that you have. We've seen so many Republicans vote for family medical leave because we're in the middle of a pandemic. That's the way legislation works.
Thank you. Well, I'm sad to report that this is all the time we have. I could go all day with this. I'm pretty sure they won't let me do that. So we're going to move on to our closing statements. Each of you will have 1 minute to close. Say whatever you want for that 1 minute. And Mr. Sullivan, you get to go first.
That's a big 1 minute. I've told people across the district for the last 16 months that the math in Connecticut's very simple. 5 + 2 = 1. We have 5 Democrat congressmen. We've had them for more than a decade. We have 2 Democrat senators. And of all those representatives, we have 1 voice that represents us in Washington, and that is a Democrat voice moving farther and farther to the left. It's time that we bring some diversity of thought and ideas back to Washington. The 5th Congressional District is a place where we have a lot of reasonable voters. Voting with Nancy Pelosi 100% of the time is not leadership, it's following the pack. And when you come back to Connecticut, it's important that you listen to the people here in the district. Nancy Johnson taught me that, and I'm very proud to have her support. And as your congressman, I will be here in the 41 towns, as I have been for the last 16 months, and in Washington 2nd. So thank you for this opportunity. Please vote on November 3rd, and I look forward to serving you. Thank you.
Mrs. Hayes.
I guess I'll finish the way that I started. We are in unprecedented times, and there's going to be a lot of work to do on the other side of this pandemic. We cannot choose winners and losers. We have to make sure that our businesses thrive, but also that individuals thrive, that people are contributors to our economy and contributors in our community. We have to make sure that not only are there jobs available, but there is a well-trained workforce and human capital to hold those jobs and apply for those jobs. That's going to take a lot of hard work, and that's going to take someone who knows how to unify people. That's the way I'm wired, and that's what I've done. I've run a campaign that is a unifying message that tries to bring people in and not ask people to choose sides. And that, I think I'm fatigued. I don't know if anyone else is exhausted by the rhetoric, by the divisiveness, but I think that any work that has to be done in a collaborative way. And that's who I am. And that's what I've continued to do. I look forward to working with you, working for you, and representing you in Congress. I am asking you once again to support my reelection, to asking for your vote, and working together to bring our communities back.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Hayes. And I have to say thank you to everybody. Thank you to the candidates. You were quite classy and professional, which makes a moderator's very happy. Thank you very much. Maybe we can all learn some lessons there across the country, like maybe tonight. Thank you very much for being here today. And I do, once again, I have to give everybody a shout out. You know, this year has been about adapting and forging on with what's important, even in the face of this pandemic. So I give the chamber all the credit in the world for making sure that even though we would much rather be in person, we are still able to hold this debate, because being an educated voter is so important. Please, whatever your choice of news source is, and obviously if you're in the 5th District, I hope you consider the Republican American and repam.com. All of the issues that we brought up today, we've been reporting on. You can look back on all of our election coverage. You can educate yourself before you get to the polls. But whatever your news source is, please get out there. Support your Connecticut newsrooms, support my newsrooms, help pay for my reporters and my photographers and my editors' salaries, please, so we can continue to do good work for you. We want you to be an educated voter, and we so want to make sure everybody gets out to vote on November 3rd. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and I'm going to hand you all off to Lynn Ward of the Greater Waterbury Chamber. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. We really appreciate all of the hard work that you put into helping us with this debate. On behalf of the Waterbury Regional Chamber, we'd like to thank Representative Hayes and Mr. Sullivan for participating today in such a professional way. We really value all of your responses, and we look forward to November 3rd. We also encourage everyone to vote, and we want to thank our sponsors. It is with the sponsorship and support and commitment from the business community that helps us thrive here at the Waterbury Regional Chamber. So special thank you to Ion Bank, Waterbury Hospital, Hubbard Hall, Direct Line Media, Paolino Public Affairs Consulting, and the Republican American. Thank you all for joining us today. Please keep in touch, waterburychamber.com, and have a good day and vote, please. Take care, everyone.